The PSP introduced the cross-media bar, aka the XMB layout for the system menu. It was a simple grid of applications grouped together by category that allowed for quick selection without the mess. The PS3 would retain the XMB going forward, so thanks PSP. Compared to modern smartphones, the PSP might not seem all that impressive, but in the context of 2005, it was a nice all-in-one machine in your pocket. Not only could it play music and web radio stations, but a big selling point was its library of movies. Famously, Spider-Man 2 was bundled with the system at launch in North America, but you could also purchase additional movies on UMD to watch in the lowest quality resolution and impress your friends at school maybe. I hate to admit this, but once I learned that you could convert movies into MPEG-4s and then play them from your memory card, I ended up watching an absurd amount of movies and anime this way on my PSP. The PSP has a staggering amount of original IP and exclusive games to the platform. There are nearly 2,000 titles on the platform, and that's not including the robust amount of PlayStation 1 games from the Classics library, or the PSP Minis, which were mostly just conversions from mobile phone games made to work on the PSP. Sony had thrown their full support behind this system and provided games from all different genres for all different types of gamers. The amount of content on a platform is a key factor in the success of said platform. This was a random discovery for me, but I recently went on a trip to Japan, and I wanted to pick up this unique visual novel called Anata o Yorosanai, which roughly translates into I Won't Forgive You. I was always intrigued by the box art and how the game required you to hold the PSP in a vertical orientation in order to play it. Out of curiosity, I popped it into my North American PSP and it booted right up. The PSP was the first instance of Sony removing the region lock, and they've carried on this practice for all their future systems. By the way, while we're on the topic of Japanese games, the PSP has an active translation community. I estimate 30% of the PSP's library was left in Japan, probably due to visual novels and RPGs being two dominant genres at the time. Recently, passionate teams have taken on the challenge of bringing many of these forbidden fruits to the West through translation patches. There's new patches releasing on a monthly basis, and I will be covering many of these awesome translations later on in the video. The PSP started the trend of using expensive proprietary memory card formats, which ended up killing their follow-up portable as a consequence. Time has forgotten how expensive the Pro Duo cards were at launch. A 4GB Pro Duo card would run you $240 in 2006 money. That's $40 more than the $200 PSP itself. The PSP is nearly 2 decades old at this point, so if you're interested in collecting one, you might also encounter a system experiencing battery bloat. The expansion of the battery can crack open the battery bay and potentially explode in your face. You should price in a battery replacement when picking up a PSP secondhand. I was never big on having an optical media drive on a system that lived in my pocket. There was a lot of confusion about how the UMDs worked, and you'll often find PSP games that have missing cases and they're just loose discs, but people didn't know that you need the case in order to play the PSP game. It didn't help that the cases themselves were rather fragile, so sometimes you'll see these snap-on replacement cases. This is a lot more common than you think. Officially, the PlayStation Store and the PSP closed in 2016. Then Sony implemented a whole bunch of backwards measures to buy PSP games on other Sony systems and transfer them over to the PSP, but then they started implementing new security features which broke those methods. So if you want to play anything on your system that isn't in physical format, it's far more convenient to pirate it.
Put down that garbage and pick up something nice. PSP me, people!
Most of these batteries are 2 decades old, which is a testament to their quality. However, like many mobile devices, PSPs are no stranger to battery bloat, which means it's time to replace them. In the PSP Reddit's Battery Mega thread, the user PSP Guru conducted a series of tests of all the known PSP battery manufacturers still in production. Cameron Sino batteries had the most impressive results as they give you 5 hours of total playtime between charges at max brightness. That's about an hour gain over the 4-hour average of most batteries. They go for around $20 on Amazon. This beautiful baby is the PSP Go. As a concept, I was initially against the PSP Go. It's a digital-only platform. The concept of ownership is non-existent. I can't even play my UMDs on it, and I had amassed quite a collection at the time, so I skipped it until this video. Well, I bought one for research purposes, immediately put half the PSP library on it, and it's quite a convenient little emulation machine, and I grew to love it, not just for its hacking capabilities, but for that little click right there. Okay, now it's even tinier. Now we're popping back into game mode. Now we're going back to the biggest energy waste clock that ever existed. Okay, I'm just gonna put this on my desk with my tiny little PSP Go stand, so people walk by, they won't even have to ask me the time. It's right there on my PSP Go. Pro Duo memory cards have come substantially down in price over the years. If you have an older model PSP, you won't break the bank here. However, the PSP Go changed the memory card format to M2, which has a limited capacity of 16 gigabytes. Thankfully, you can buy a microSD to M2 adapter online for about $10. It's easy to install. You just remove the back panel of your Go, pop the M2 adapter into the memory card bay, then tape down this ribbon cable to the back of your PSP Go, and there you have it. You can pop a micro SD card up to 128 gigabytes in size, which should give you ample space for all your legally backed up games. Once you've gotten the memory card upgrade situated, I would highly recommend putting custom firmware on your system. Here's a guide to get you set up. You just choose which model PSP you have, and after 20 minutes of work, you'll have a fun little emulation machine. It doesn't have a wide variety of systems that it can emulate, but it will play most retro portable devices just fine. I have fond memories of playing through Mother 3 on the Game Boy Advance emulator running on my PSP. Considering that this also plays the majority of the PlayStation 1 library on top of all these emulators, it's a nifty little device to have around. Without a doubt, the PlayStation Vita is the ultimate upgrade. It's my favorite handheld of all time due to its beautiful OLED screen, the major improvement of 2 analog sticks, and remappable buttons for classic titles. Plays all the PSP and PS1 games available on the PlayStation Store, granted you can access it. PSP is also stupidly easy to emulate on just about any phone or low-end device that you may own. For ease of capture, I will be using PPSSPP, the PSP emulator, during this video. Your mileage may vary when it comes to the quality of emulation. There's a large amount of fine-tuning you have to do to get some of these games to run optimally without issues, like missing textures or bizarre graphical freakouts. There's not a ton of information on how to correct some of these. You might have to do your homework to get your favorite obscure game to play nicely with the emulator. I'm not here to judge. Play how you want or on whatever device suits you best. Without further interruption, let's celebrate and talk some games. The Third Birthday, released by Square Enix in 2010. There's just a general crossed arms anime avatar reception to this game, and I don't understand why. Maybe it has something to do with the Third Birthday being technically the third entry in the Parasite Eve series. Now, I do love Parasite Eve, but I consider this one to be more of a Gaiden type of story, a spin-off that could exist as a standalone entry and not interfere with the mainline canon. The plot here primarily deals with time travel, so it could be easily written around if Square ever decided to resurrect this dead franchise. I believe the third birthday was Square's attempt to have a clean break from its basis in the novel Parasite Eve, as the series had well established an original storyline at that point, and original characters far removed from the Hideaki Seina horror novel. Besides, rebirth is a major theme within the series, and that's evident with the format shift between each entry. For example, the original Parasite Eve was a Final Fantasy VII style turn-based horror RPG that acted as a sequel to the novel. Parasite Eve 2 shed some of the RPG elements in favor of veering off into a action-based survival horror game that greatly resembled Resident Evil. And then came the third birthday, which evolved the series into a modern third-person cover shooter with squad-based elements. I know that sounds generic on its face, but it's handled really well here, and it's surprisingly addictive and replayable. I can't be mad, the third birthday was just carrying on the tradition of reinvention. The general setup here is that you play as Aya Brea, a former NYPD cop stricken with a bout of amnesia. All of her data has been erased and nobody really knows who she is or how she got here. There's a swarm of monsters known as Twisted that have attacked New York City and the world at large. A task force called the Counter-Twisted Investigation is set up, and Aya is recruited for her mitochondrial superpowers. The twist this time centers around Aya's overdive ability, which allows her to send her soul back in time. There, she can inhabit the bodies of people near the site of the Twisted attacks, primarily soldiers. Aya can hop between people and soldiers on the field to gain new vantage points or position the squad to fight the Twisted as a group. The fast-paced nature of the third birthday really sets it apart from the other two games. Aya will have to make use of the plentiful cover walls and note the positions of all the soldiers on the field in relationship to the enemies. Hopping between soldiers will provide her better access to the monster's weak points, and Aya can command the troops to all focus fire on one particular enemy. The battles have somewhat of a stagger system, not too dissimilar from Final Fantasy XIII, where if you inflict enough damage on an enemy, you'll weaken their defenses and open them up for an overdive attack, which deals a massive blow to their HP, and Aya can also collect a DNA chip from them, which will enhance her powers. Each enemy presents their own challenges and weaknesses to certain weapon types. What's cool is that Aya can hot swap between several different weapons, all of which have incredibly robust leveling trees and parts to customize. Also, each soldier on the field has a special weapon that they are carrying. So, say you need a sniper, you can just zap over to the guy who has the sniper, or zap over to somebody riding a tank, or the guy who has the satellite laser gun. The game demands your focus during battles, but also provides you with many moments of reprieve in between maps. There's some interesting storytelling that goes on when Aya is just chilling with all of these soldiers and they're sharing anecdotes about the battle against the Twisted or what they're gonna do when they get home. This is also one of the points where you can customize Aya's DNA board, where you can insert chips to build her strengths to your preference and give her new abilities that she can use on the field. Think of the DNA boards kind of like a job system that you have full reign over. Many people have complained that they have weakened Aya and she's not the same as she was in the previous two games, and all of her clothes get ripped off in a sexy battle damage way. Without getting into spoilers, there is a valid reason for the personality change. As far as the battle damage is concerned, maybe it's decades of fried dopamine receptors in my coon brain doing the talking, but the sexuality on display is modest at best. But historically speaking, Aya has always had a status as a sex symbol, giving her gratuitous character artwork and obligatory shower scenes. If you want a case of fan service battle damage, then play Illbleed. It goes hard. Anyways, when you complete a mission, you return back to the present day, where history has changed in some way due to Aya's time-traveling escapades. These moments moments are a nice reprieve from the missions, and it's fun to discover the changes that have occurred in the world since you altered the timeline. There's a rich amount of flavor text to discover and dialogue between Aya and the team. They do a whole lot of world building inside the confines of these bases if you take the time to explore it. Back in 2010, there just seemed to be a lower tolerance for difficult games, so the audience just wasn't ready for what the third birthday was dishing out. But it provides a lot of customizable weapons, costumes for Aya, a true ending to unlock after the players completed the game a couple of times. The first playthrough is only a fraction of the larger experience. You are rewarded with fresh new gear and a plethora of challenges by taking on the additional difficulty modes. Everything from your previous run carries over, and you'll need to beat the game upwards of 10 times to truly see everything the game has to offer. By the way, I have a couple of video guides that will help you farm easy experience and weapon points if you're up for the challenge. I just want to point out this concept art for the third birthday. I think it perfectly captures the spirit of the game, ripped jeans and all. It's intense moments of high pressure chaos followed by somber moments of reflection. It may not be the Parasite Eve game that everyone wanted out there, but there's still a lot of love paid to the rest of the series. The soundtrack here does a lot of remixes from the original Parasite Eve games, but tweaked to give you that high energy feeling of the battles. I think this is one of the most underrated games on the platform. It's hated for superficial reasons at best. I don't typically give scores to games, but if I did, I would consider the third birthday to be as close to a 10 as you can get on the PSP. It's perfect for on the go. If you're able to finish the game twice, you're gonna be stuck in the gameplay loop of going for higher and higher challenges, and you will have my eternal respect if you unlock the lightning costume for Aya. Hikiko says, check it out, the third birthday is an essential PSP exclusive. Developed by Ennis and ported to the PSP in 2006, Gitaroo Man Lives is a scaled-back version of my favorite rhythm game of all time, with a couple new levels added and a multiplayer mode. Gitaroo Man is the story about U1, a down-on-his-luck incel that, despite his best efforts to appear cool in front of his one true love Pico, falls flat on his face at every turn. Tail between his legs, he heads home, and is suddenly attacked by a baby demon wielding a musical axe. Then, his dog Puma rips the skin from his body, revealing the legendary Gitaroo. U1 catches it midair and transforms into the titular Gitaroo Man. The best way I could describe Gitaroo Man is that it's a rhythm game meets a fighting game, which is kind of hard to describe due to its offbeat and very unique style. You and your opponent have a health bar, and your goal is to perform epic rock ballads to drain the foe's bar until they forfeit a magic item, which will then power up your Gitaroo. You have to guide this arrow through these long lines using the analog stick and strum the Gitaroo when you see these circles. You can also sustain the note by holding the button down for the duration of the line, which earns you more points and drains the enemy's health. There are 4 phases to a typical battle. Phase 1 is charging. This is where U1 charges up his health bar for the fight. Phase 2, battle mode. U1 will zap the enemy with his Gitaroo to drain the enemy's bar. Phase 3, defense. The enemy will assault U1 with a series of button prompts, which you have to hit in order to avoid damage. And the final phase is, well, the final. Occasionally, the game will check to see how much health the enemy has left to see if you're ready to enter the final phase and end the battle. You can get there earlier if you're nailing all the notes accurately, or the battle will continue on another stanza until you qualify for the final phase. The final phase is an epic string of notes that send the boss to the great beyond, and thus concludes the battle. Once you hear that disembodied Asian voice, you know you've won.
You win!
You're then scored and graded. The better you do, the more unlockable profiles you earn, and you can progress to the next level. I play through Gitaroo Man at least once every couple of months. The music and intense battles are addicting. There's a great spread of music here, ranging from rock to synth pop to reggae to acoustic love ballads. My personal favorite piece is the Sandbone Trio level. You fight this trio of robotic skeletons who are each a separate instrument, and the battle starts before you has the Gitaroo powers, so you have to survive until you are able to turn into Gitaroo Man.
Sorry for the wait, you won! Puma, Gitaroo!
It's an interesting mashup of genres. The Sandbone Trio play these industrial-sounding instruments, which clash heavily against U1's Spanish acoustic riffs. When I play this level, it always puts me into a good mood. Now, keep in mind, if you choose to emulate Gitaroo Man like I am for this video, there is a chance the game will eat your inputs due to lag introduced, and you may encounter some frame hitches depending on your setup. This is also the case if you choose to emulate the PS2 version. If you want a more responsive experience, play it on the original hardware. Gitaroo Man is unlike any other rhythm game you will ever play in your lifetime, and if you practice enough, you'll fall in love with its quirkiness and intense showdowns. Easily the best rhythm game on the platform, and it has a lot of competition. Half Minute Hero, released in 2009 by Opus. Half Minute Hero is a fast-paced deconstruction of an RPG. Now, you start the game as a generic chosen one kind of hero, who has to save the kingdom from some evil guy. The catch here is that you only have 30 seconds to grind, do your shopping, and make it to the boss, otherwise it's game over. Well, how's it possible to accomplish all these tasks in this short amount of time? Here's the catch. You meet a goddess that has the power to send you back 30 seconds in time, for a small fee, of course. When you're in the villages, the timer freezes, which allows you to do all the shopping as long as you want without a penalty. Typically, you just want to go out and grind in short bursts to level up and earn enough money to then reset the clock. This would appear like the premise would wear thin, but that is not the case at all, as each level offers a unique challenge or gimmick to keep it fresh. For example, in order to get to the boss of this level, you have to wait for the day to progress long enough for the tide to recede, which then opens up the pathway to the boss fight. Or in this level, where you need to first find the fly swatter before you can take down this bug boss. If you don't like this mode, there are multiple other ones to try. For example, there's this RTS hero mode, and then there's this bullet hell mode if you're into that sort of thing, and a couple others to unlock. Half Minute Hero mocks and celebrates tropes within video games in equal measure. There's also a sequel called Half Minute Hero: The Second Coming that was recently translated into English for the PSP. This game's also available on Xbox and Steam, but this is the kind of game that you want to play on the go. If you have the time, check it out. Hammerin Hero, released by Irem in 2008. Hammerin Hero is a tough-as-nails 2.5D retro platformer that belongs to the Hammer and Harry series. You play as Gin-san, a carpenter who uses his hammer to bash away all of life's problems. Let me be upfront, this is one of the most challenging yet rewarding games on the PSP. As Gin, you have to make your way through small levels that only last around 2 minutes. The catch is, it's one hit and you're dead. Your enemies are bobble-headed corporate goons who will telegraph their attacks with red hitbox outlines. Now, under most circumstances, hitting these outlines with the correct timing will parry the enemy attacks, or at the very least, it gives you an idea of when to move out of the way. Now, these short levels will get easier through trial and error. Mostly error. You're gonna die a lot. The better you do, the higher your score at the end, which will unlock new collectibles, difficulties, and other neat secrets within. One of my favorite aspects is how Gin-san can help all the citizens throughout the level. When you whack this little trouble bubble over someone's head, you'll solve their problem in some way, leading to the citizen to either aid Gin in battle, or you'll fix their relationship problems. You get these cute little letters from the citizens about how Gin-san helped them by bashing their problems away after the level. As you progress through the game, you'll unlock new job classes for Gin to use in his quest. Each job has a unique weapon and special move to use to your advantage. One of my favorites is the DJ job class because it gives Gin a long-range attack, which is super useful in almost every scenario. Matching the best job to the stage is a major part of the strategy here. Also, if you're running into the trouble with the difficulty of the levels, you can have Gin's girlfriend make him a bento box. These bentos can raise his attack power, give him additional hits for his defense, or increase his score multiplier. The bentos are another key strategy to progress. I won't lie, many players will not enjoy the old school format and at times the unfair challenge of Hammerin Hero, but personally, I found the charming cast of enemies and the fun secrets to be enough motivation to press forward through the tough times. If you take it slow and focus on learning the patterns of the enemies, you'll find the game to be a fun challenge once you know their gimmicks. Just take this one piece of advice: when in doubt, hammer it out. This gets a high recommendation. After a troubled development and a complete reworking of the game, Silent Hill Origins, also known as Silent Hill 0, was released in late 2007 by Climax Studios. Initially, Silent Hill Origins was presented as an over-the-shoulder type Resident Evil third-person shooter, with generic-looking ghouls roaming the streets of Silent Hill. Now, the producers of the game felt the original team, Climax Los Angeles, had missed the mark in creating something that resembled the tone of the Silent Hill series. For some reason, Climax Los Angeles thought that Silent Hill should be more comedic and action-centric, inspired by the television series Scrubs. Understandably, this concerned the producers of the game so much, they shifted development duties over to the British arm of Climax Studios, Climax UK. Unfortunately, Climax UK only had a small amount of time and an even smaller budget to salvage this game into something that somewhat resembles a mainline entry. In Origins, you play as a good old boy, big rig driver, Travis Grady, a trucker with a heart of gold and buns of steel. One night, he's out making a delivery to a nearby town, Brahms, when a person runs out into the middle of the road and he makes an emergency stop. He follows the specter of a young Alessa Gillespie, who leads him to a burning house.
Not fog. It's smoke. My God.
Inside, he rescues what appears to be some sort of bacon person from a ritualistic sacrifice. He passes out and wakes up in Silent Hill. From this point on, it's a relatively standard fare Silent Hill title, with the first two games being the primary sources for the design. You wander through abandoned locations looking for the missing girl and jiggling hundreds of doorknobs. The gimmick this time around is that Travis has full control of his traversal to the frost-covered otherworld. He can travel freely to and from the otherworld anytime he finds a mirror. Travis will face off against various placeholder monsters from the Silent Hill series on his redneck rescue quest, notably the bubblehead nurses, the patient demons from Silent Hill 2, and a totally new original character, the big knife-wielding brute known as the Butcher. Wow, that's so cool. I've never seen that kind of character before. My biggest gripe with Origins were the inclusion of frequent QTEs during fights. They compromised the atmosphere they were working towards with large button prompts. I'm still not certain why they chose to include breakable weapons in the game, since they're already so plentiful to come by. This mechanic doesn't make much sense to create additional tension when at any time Travis can just whip out a replacement weapon straight out of his magic pants and continue on with the fight. Despite these minor gripes, I have come to appreciate what Origins tried to accomplish. It has just as many positive qualities, such as the signature atmosphere-setting soundtrack by Akira Yamaoka. That's always a plus. And it also has some decent fog effects at play, with the caveat for a PSP game. Now, even though the combat here is clunky, it doesn't interfere too much with the exploration, since you can just as easily run by most enemies, so it's not the biggest deal in the world. The story doesn't present many revelations to expand upon the already existing Silent Hill lore or retcon anything of substance. They just made some light touches to set up Silent Hill 1, and it's mostly a standalone story. It's up for debate whether or not it's canon, but it really doesn't matter to me, since I've come to consider the Western line to exist in its own spin-off continuity. For example, Travis does make a brief cameo at the beginning of Silent Hill Homecoming when he gives Alex Shepard a ride into Shepard's Glen. It's also worth considering that Silent Hill is a surrealist horror franchise where each game lends itself to exploring new possibilities by presenting multiple endings to build from. I mean, it's entirely alright to just relax and enjoy the Western games for what they were without needing to provide any further justification, if you ask me. You didn't, but I told ya. Origins carries on the Silent Hill tradition by giving players a variety of endings and one always welcome UFO gag ending to seek out. It also has some decent unlockable costumes and weapons to use in the New Game Plus mode, giving it some replayability. Silent Hill Origins never really bothered me until people told me I should be bothered. That's because a lot of Silent Hill diehards will tell you to avoid Origins at all costs, and you're not allowed to enjoy anything but the Japanese originals. Just keep in mind, these same very people have never even played through any of the Silent Hill games and are likely just parroting a disgruntled YouTuber's opinions for upvotes. You know what they say, those who nitpick the importance of foreskin are bound to find nothing but misery in the end. But take it from this disgruntled YouTuber, Origins isn't perfect, but if you go in with the expectations of a full-on survival horror game on the PSP, it does a serviceable job. At the very least, it's worth at least one playthrough. Released 2 years after Origins in 2009, also by Climax Studios, Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a full-on reimagination of the first Silent Hill game. The basic setup is that you're Harry Mason, a middle-aged father who crashes his Jeep during a blizzard and ends up smack dab in the middle of Silent Hill, sans one daughter, Cheryl.
Cheryl? 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 Cheryl!
Outside of some reoccurring series character names, that's about all the similarities it bears to the original Silent Hill. Shattered Memories is a lonely, frost-covered exploration through the finer details of Silent Hill. It's all about observation and immersion.
Hey,
Over the years, some would accuse Shattered Memories of being too gimmicky for its main draw, the psychology system, where the game caters the experience to the player's choices during psychiatry sessions, how they observe items within the world, and their engagement with the characters in it. For the most part, the game abandons combat in the traditional sense, replacing it with icy hedge mazes and monsters known as raw shocks to run from. Time and again, people have complained about these chase sequences, saying that it's easy to get lost, yada yada yada. Just take 5 minutes of your time to read out the tutorial notes. By the way, the PSP version is much easier than the Wii version due to its responsive button prompts in place of waggling to shake off the monsters. So if you're frustrated before playing the Wii version, try this one out. It's almost too easy. Without rehashing all the events for the umpteenth time, I just want to say Silent Hill Shattered Memories is a game I play through at least once a year. It's only around 4 hours long, so it doesn't demand too much of a commitment for your time, and the shorter experience lends itself to the replayability factor, so you can dive back in and try out different choices to see what changes within the world. In my opinion, this is the best entry in the Western line of Silent Hill games, and in at least the top 5 of all Silent Hill games. Shattered Memories is a better product because of its deviations rather than its imitations. I hope the newer Silent Hill games take a cue from this one by trying something radically different from the original games. Even though the Wii version is overall the better experience from a technical and immersion standpoint, the PSP port is no slouch. It maintains a solid 30 frames and pulls off some impressive effects without compromising too much in the way of graphics or atmosphere. Just make sure you're performing the survival horror ritual before you dive in. Turn off the lights, plug in some good headphones, and let the game take you on a chilling journey. By the way, if you're trying to emulate Silent Hill Shattered Memories, do note that emulating introduces a lot of graphical issues. Notably, it makes the flashlight bug out. There will be missing textures, which can interfere with some of the psychological profiling. The missing graphics will also prevent you from using the cell phone, which is a critical tool in the game and essential to the storytelling here. And you might miss out on some of the puzzle solutions. I couldn't find a lot of information on how to restore these textures within the emulator PPSSPP. You won't run into these issues if you play on original hardware. Not knocking emulation, I'm just throwing this out there as a word of caution. Once further, Silent Hill Shattered Memories comes with my highest recommendation. It's one of the best looking games on the platform and a good starting place for somebody just getting into Silent Hill. Undead Knights, released in 2009 by Team Tachyon. Undead Knights was a dark high fantasy spin on the Dynasty Warriors format that no one seems to talk about, so I'm gonna do it. This is the story about 3 members of the House of Blood, and it begins at the end of their lives. They are at war with a rival kingdom, and their troops are quickly overwhelmed. Just before their death, the trio makes a deal with the devil to come back to life as necromancers, which kicks off their bloody tale of revenge. The gimmick here is centered around being a necromancer. The characters can raise fallen soldiers and turn them into a zombie army. You can snatch up an enemy soldier and turn them into a zombie, and then sick them on their friends to eat them alive. You can also pick up a zombie and hurl them at foes to slow them down or expose a weak point. You can also use their bodies as a zombie shield against projectiles, or you can direct them at a structure to demolish it. They put a little Pikmin in my Dynasty Warriors, and I love it! At the start of each level, you choose which family member you want to play as. There's Romulus, who's the head of the family. He's a bit of an all-arounder character with a sword. Then there's the younger brother, Remus, who is this hulking cloaked figure who is a tankier brute style of player. And then there's Sylvia, a scythe-wielding princess that has some decent AoE attacks. It really doesn't alter the storyline who you choose to play as, and you can switch up characters between each level, so just choose whoever you like to play as or whoever you think would fit the situation better. As you play, you earn experience which can be used to unlock new combos or enhance character perks. For example, you can lower the time it takes to convert a human into a zombie. Now, if you go into Undead Knights with reasonably low expectations, it's quite an impressive warrior style game, and there's plenty of characters on the field without the frame rate dipping down too low. Most of these warrior type games rarely deviate from the formula, so it's a breath of fresh air when one takes a horror approach for a change and throws in some light problem solving. Now, this game is on the short side, clocking in at around 7 hours, give or take, but it ends before the premise wears thin. And you know me, I'm a fan of simple games that don't waste your time. Undead Knights. This is the only channel that's probably ever going to recommend this game. Hikiko says, check it out.
There must be something I have that you will take in trade?
Sure. Hand over both your lungs and we'll call it even. Go on!
Work time fun!
Released in 2005 and developed by a man famously arrested for cocaine, Work Time Fun might be the weirdest game presented in this video, and that's saying something. The brief explainer here is that you're unemployed and have a crippling gachapon addiction. So, you go to a job center located in the middle of hell to take on the most frustrating and monotonous jobs for a paltry paycheck to support your addiction. For example, you can take a job at a pin factory to put caps on trillions of pins until you grow tired of the company gossip and punch out. Or you can play a game of Human Frogger. Just go collect all those mushrooms and go meet up with your friend holding a cum sign. What, that's not your style? Maybe you're the lumberjack type, or the chick sorting type, or you're a cliff race dude. Look, all I can say is most of the minigames in Work Time Fun are a bizarre and disturbing exercise in patience. You're gonna waste an absurd amount of time doing these jobs and be mocked every step of the way for the effort. But the good part is, you get to take all of your money over to the gachapon machines to earn little trinkets for your collection, which you can collect and trade with other psychos that you know with a copy of WTF. You can also unlock new jobs that will be added to the shuffle at the job center, and silly tools which will turn your PSP into a flashlight, this blank white screen here, or a set of eyes. Here's looking at you, kid. Along the way, you get to read these creepy emails from your friends that reveal odd quirks about their daily lives and are somewhat passive-aggressive water cooler conversations. I bought Work Time Fun for a friend's birthday many years ago, and we've never stopped talking about it. If you are a fan of the WarioWare series, this is Sony's equivalent to that. It's a first-party Sony game made by the lead singer of the synth-pop group Dinky Groove and a man famously patched out of the Yakuza series, Pierre Taki. It takes a respectable amount of drug use to come up with a game like Work Time Fun and his follow-up, The Last Guy. Work Time Fun is a 10 out of 10 essential PSP game. Every collection should have this, but it's even better if you find a friend and experience the madness together. Me and My Katamari, released in 2006 by Namco. This was a game that I hadn't played until very recently. My favorite game in the series, We Love Katamari, had only come out months before Me and My Katamari, so at the time I had my fill of the series, and when I saw a friend playing this version of the game, I felt it looked uncomfortable with the small analog stick and the face button for the controls. It also looked sort of derivative from We Love Katamari. In fact, every subsequent game since We Love Katamari had no involvement from series creator Keita Takahashi. So I passed it up.
Who are some game developers you look up to personally?
I don't have any friends in the game industry, but yeah.
The setup this time around is that the Prince of All Cosmos and his family, the King and Queen of All Cosmos, are going on a royal family vacation to a remote island. His dad starts splashing around, accidentally causes a tsunami, and strands all the animals that live on it. So, as the good-natured prince, you have to take an object called a Katamari, which is like this gravitational magnet ball that picks up random bits and pieces and people and all sorts of objects to form one solid mass that the king will then transform into the islands and then make all the animals happy. You roll the ball, you pick up small things until you can gradually pick up bigger things, and that's your progression. Very easy to understand. Almost anyone can appreciate this game. If you've played one Katamari, you've played them all. But this one has a ton of content for a portable title. There are plenty of cousins to find, presents and accessories for your character to wear, new secret levels to find, and there's even a multiplayer mode built into this. I personally have never played this with somebody, but I'm not opposed to the idea. As far as the controls are concerned, the whole analog stick and face buttons, you just kind of get used to them, but for the most part, the game maintains a solid frame rate. It's Katamari on the go, and I don't have many complaints about this one. It's a solid Katamari game, and I'm kicking myself for not playing it all these years. Even if this is your first Katamari game, it's not a bad place to start. I've put 40 hours or so into it. It's one of the most addicting games on the platform. There's a ton of content. Check it out. We've officially reached the mid-roll section of the video, and now it's time to give a PSA about protection. PSP protection. This is my Logitech clamshell case. Now, I bought this at the launch of the PSP, and my launch model PSP is still in great condition because of this hard clamshell case. I've dropped it on hard concrete, my PSP slipped out of my hand, and this thing kept my PSP safe. Now, of course, it doesn't come with a Fire Emblem insert there. I actually cut that out of a magazine, and what it has is these rubber guards on the inside, and you can pop these out, and you could get the dimensions for this. They used to actually have a website that you could get custom printouts for this, but I just cut mine out of a magazine, pop it back in place, and then I like to keep my cleaning cloth inside of there, so as I'm on the go and my PSP's getting all smudged up, I can just... Now we're clean again. Another cool feature is you can fold it out, and this side will lean on a desk, and if you're watching a movie, it's more convenient. It's a nice little pop stand. And yeah, it's one of the best cases I've ever gotten. It's like $10, a worthy investment to keep your PSP 1000 through 3000 model safe. Now, as far as the Go is concerned, it's not as pretty. I actually just had some Bluetooth headphones that I bought, and it came with this soft shell case. It's tiny, it fits my PSP Go, and it's got a little sleeve there for the charging cable. It only has one charging cable, not a big brick. And I keep my cleaning cloth in there too. Boom, everything's safe. There was your PSA about PSP protection. On with the video. Disaster Report 3, brought to you by Granzella in 2009, and recently fan translated into English by GeoCity Productions. Disaster Report 3, A Fading City and Her Song, was the biggest treat for me during the production of this video. Now, I've reviewed 2 of the Zatai Zetsumi Tashi games, aka the Disaster Report games, on my channel, and they are always a delight to share with you. The Disaster Report games are the brainchildren of series creator Kazuma Kujo. In a nutshell, they are low-budget survival comedies that place you in the shoes of a blank slate protagonist presented with every natural disaster scenario you could imagine and morality choices to consider in the heat of the moment. What I love most about the DR series is that they appear overly simplistic at first glance and a little shallow, but that's not the case. Control-wise, you are only expected to run, jump, climb, and most importantly, duck when the earthquake tremors hit. You only have to worry about a stamina and health gauge. So if you ever find your character is worn out, you might find a bench to rest at and save your game. I think Final Fantasy VII Remake might have lifted this wholesale from Disaster Report. The game builds off of its simple foundation in many hilarious and interesting ways. The direction of your adventure is entirely up to you, how you want to craft your character's personality.
Yay! スリル満点最高の気分よ。え？あんな目にあったっていうのに。
You can be a complete psychopath in mismatched clothing, dancing on a ladder in a crumbling building if you so choose to. Now, this is a survival game in the technical sense, so space in your backpack is limited, and you'll need to choose what to carry with you or what to forego on your adventure. Don't worry about this though, the game is quite generous with the space, and you're also going to get backpack upgrades as you go along. Did I mention the best part of this series? These cute little compasses you can find on the ground and immediately equip. They went a tad overboard in DR3 as there's a new compass to discover in nearly every area of the game, but I'm not complaining. Once again, this may appear to be a basic game on the surface, but give it an hour and suddenly you're gonna get wrapped up in fire tornadoes and a murder mystery. As you encounter various disaster scenarios, you will unlock pages in your survival guide that actually provides useful information if you ever find yourself in one of these disasters in real life. I'm not kidding. This game was released 2 years before the catastrophic Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, and some Japanese gamers credited this shitty little PSP game with saving their lives. I've gotta hand it to Granzella. Props for making something both entertaining and useful. I did not want to put this down when making this video. This was my first time through, and I'm gonna continue on playing. Major shout out to GeoCity Productions for their excellent translation work. It must have been a hellish endeavor with how bizarre some of the dialogue is in this series. Highest recommendation possible. Grand Knight's History, released by George Kamatani's Vanillaware in 2011. Now, despite this game being a massive financial success for the company, this game was never localized for players in the West. That was until it got a fan translation patch in 2015. Now, the patch itself isn't 100% complete because you can't play the multiplayer component, but that's alright because all those official servers have shut down long ago. The entirety of the single player campaign is fully translated. I'm a huge fan of Vanillaware games, and this is my first time checking this one out. All of Vanillaware's games have beautifully hand-drawn sprites, allowing these games to have a timeless quality to them. You choose the nation that you want to support, and you take on a band of mercenaries who have to participate in a variety of missions for their kingdom. The game is presented in somewhat of a tabletop format. You're only given a certain amount of energy and days to complete the quest. list. There are a whole bunch of towns and dungeons to explore, and a lot of monsters to take on. The battles are somewhat of a mixture between a tactical and a turn-based RPG. They take place on a grid, your characters have certain ranges for their attacks, and like any typical RPG, you kill the monsters, you earn experience, you unlock treasure, get gold, and then upgrade all your weapons and characters. Forgive me, but I've barely scratched the surface of Grand Knight's history, and it will take me quite some time to complete. But from the sparse amount of time that I've played, everything that I've come to expect from Vanillaware games is in place, and it seems as if it's going to be jam-packed full of content. If you're a fan of the Disgaea series or Final Fantasy Tactics, I would highly recommend checking this one out.
Been no adverse effects on Hope Falls and the surrounding area.
Deadhead Fred, developed by Vicious Cycle Entertainment and published by D3 in 2007. By the way, Deadhead Fred is officially a part of the Simple series in Japan, with a much better cover art over there. Deadhead Fred is a dark comedy that stars Fred Newman, a private eye that wakes up one day sans head. He's been reduced to a floating brain in a jar screwed to his decomposing frame. The mad scientist, Dr. Steiner, whom bears a strong resemblance to both look and voice of Half-Life 2's Dr. Kleiner, manages to catch Fred up to speed about his current condition and explains that he was investigating the nefarious mob boss Ulysses Pitt when his cover was blown and consequently he was murdered.
There's the small matter of your head.
My head? What about my head?
Perhaps you should take a look for yourself.
What the fuck? What have you done to me?
Fred's frustration is given a lot of dimension with the comedic delivery presented by Scrubs, John C. McGinley. He's often known for playing sarcastic, wisecracking characters, and he was the perfect fit for the role. Fred's on a mission to recover his lost memories and put a stop to Pitt's reign of evil in the town of Hope Falls. This game is a somewhat open-world action platformer that has an ambitiously large scope for a PSP game. As Fred, you have the ability to swap out his head on the fly to imbue him with new abilities which will help him solve some puzzles, take out foes, and platform his way to new areas. For example, the zombie head allows him to suck up fluids into his head sack to then spray on enemies or put out fires. It can also inflate with air, allowing him to hover over to new areas. That's about the gist of the head swapping system at play. You get into fights, decapitate foes, and eventually get new heads and abilities which give you a reason to revisit previous areas in a Metroidvania fashion. Before I lay down my criticisms, I want to acknowledge how creative the design of the characters and puzzles are. The design here bears a strong resemblance to the ugly but charming caricature stylings of a Tim Schafer game, with notes of the 1950s dystopian horror found within Stubbs the Zombie. Deadhead comes very close to becoming a cult classic, but it is hamstrung greatly by awful combat. Unfortunately, the flaws of this system rear their ugly head when you arrive at the game's first boss fight with the big titty necromancer Juju Judy. She raises the dead and sicks them on the player whilst lobbing fireballs at the same time. If you did not take the time out to learn the game's combo system, then you're gonna get quickly overwhelmed. Take my advice here. Just walk over to this corner of the graveyard because Judy cannot hit you with her fireballs, and this allows you to take out her henchmen. It took me about 5 tries to get through this fight, because up until this point, the game never required you to learn the combo system to progress. It's unfortunate because this game truly opens up and becomes extremely interesting right after this fight. If you manage to push through it, you'll get introduced to the game's upgrade system, where you can collect enemy heads and craft new ones for Fred to wear, and expand his fighting abilities. Fred can unlock new areas of Hope Falls to explore and a plethora of side missions. I have 2 minds about Deadhead Fred. I can see how much love was poured into the world, the characters, and the puzzles. There are moments of brilliance in this little PSP game, but the other part of me also recognizes that it desperately needed refinement in these areas as well. Once upon a time, there were talks of giving the HD treatment to Deadhead Fred, and John C. McGinley expressed doing a sequel, but unfortunately, its developer Vicious Cycle went out of business in 2016, which makes this a dead franchise in more ways than one. If you're patient enough to suffer the clunkiness of the fighting and platforming, there's around 15 hours of content to explore, and that's double the amount of your standard platformer. There's a lot of game here, but not a lot of polish. Soft recommendation.
Ooh, you are better than I thought. Strong and handsome. I bet you are an amazing lover.
Judy, I have to tell you something. It may turn you on, so settle yourself. If I had a mouth, I'd hurl on you.
Infected, released by Planet Moon Studios in 2005. Infected is a game I was always curious about. It has this loud, eye-searing orange cover art that just sticks out on any game shelf. Infected is a third-person arcade-style zombie shoot game. You play as a police officer who happens to be a part of the 1% of people with immunity to the zombie virus. The catch here is that your blood is the secret weapon against the zombie hordes. So as the officer, you have to weaken the zombies with standard old weapons until they turn bright red. When they're red, they're vulnerable to being exploded with your viral gun, which is shooting out your blood. Now the aim here is to group up as many weakened zombies in close proximity and then fire off your viral gun to take them out in a string combo to increase your score multiplier. Admittedly, this is very rough in terms of character models and muddy presentation. It's a tad crass with its sense of humor too, but it's enjoyable enough if you dig old school score attack games, and there's a lot of stupid content to unlock. As you clear levels, you earn money from earning higher ranks within the missions, which you can then use that money to spend on new weapons, character upgrades, and brand new characters to play as. By the way, some of those characters include members from the band Slipknot. I don't know why. The gameplay in Infected can be quite challenging at times because you gotta dash around the map, maintaining your combo meter and protecting survivors from the zombie horde. You're gonna need to keep up with your character upgrades and utilize all the random chainsaw drops at the right time to maximize your score. Eventually you're going to hit a wall and you'll need to revisit old levels to try and get higher ranks. Now don't let the ugly presentation scare you away. There is some entertainment value of the mindless variety to appreciate about it. Infected belongs to a genre of games that I lovingly refer to as white trash kidcore. It's a low-budget title that you would convince yourself was cool because you're a poor kid and have limited options of other better video games at the time. I mean, your mom spent her gum job money on this, and it entertained you while she was out with your new dad Troy, so quit complaining. Final words, I did my time with Infected, and I don't want out. Soft recommendation.
Winner of Button Lane, the new adventures for a news flash.
Like hell itself was how one eyewitness described today's slaughter at the plaza. Grandmothers had their limbs pulled off and were beaten to death with them. Mothers were ripping open the stomachs of their own children, chewing on their intestines.
Diane, there's kids watching!
Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker, put out by Kojima Productions in 2010. Although this isn't my personal favorite Metal Gear game, I felt it was worth including since most people consider it to be the crowning achievement of the PlayStation Portable. For what it is, I think it is an impressive achievement, as the team behind Metal Gear Peace Walker was just as large as the one that created Metal Gear Solid 4, and one of the code names for Peace Walker was originally Metal Gear Solid 5, so there was a lot of dedication to this project. This is the story about Snake's rise into the title of Big Boss. He's forming a paramilitary group of mercenaries and doing military operations in Costa Rica. Because this is a portable title, they structured the game as a series of missions with various different objectives. The game itself runs in like 240p and an uncapped 30 frames with lots of dips on the PSP. It's a game that, yes, I like to play in small bursts, but I'd rather be playing with 2 analog sticks. That's why I didn't finish the game until it came out on the Metal Gear Solid HD collection. It has a unique feature called transferring. It's one of those made-up words Kojima came up with to describe carrying your save file from the PSP and converting it for something that you could use on the PS3, and then continue on with your file in the HD collection. I would play Peace Walker in my living room or on a lunch break or something, clear a few missions, and at the end of the day, go over to my PS3, convert the save file, and then I could just continue on in HD with 2 analog sticks and 60 frames. It was a strange dichotomy of experiences, to say the least. Peace Walker itself is not a bad game. It does set up the events to Metal Gear Solid 5 and is a critical piece of the overall story. I do like how all of the story is presented in animated comic book cutscenes, and I always have an affinity towards the esoteric style of bonus missions, like the dating sim where Snake gets it on in a cardboard box, or the supernatural haunted levels where Snake has to stealth by all these ghosts, or he could resuscitate a fallen soldier to put the soul back into the body. I remember Peace Walker fondly because of the silly experiences like fighting a Rathalos from the Monster Hunter series. I'm not a huge fan of the boss fights within Metal Gear Peace Walker. All the enemies are bullet sponges with large health bars, and it really does require you to get invested into the multiplayer. Unfortunately, the PSP multiplayer is dead, but there still seems to be an active community of a few people playing Peace Walker on the HD collection on the PS3. It's not a bad game, it's just not particularly memorable in any regard. I looked through my save file and I had no recollection of doing anything except for collecting all these soldiers to build up Mother Base. If you're a Metal Gear Solid fan, I'm sure Hideo Kojima would appreciate it if you played this game, because he seems to value it more than many other titles in the series. He never shuts up about how hard it was to develop this and how critical it is to the whole Metal Gear universe. It's a good game, but I wouldn't recommend it on the PSP necessarily.
Metal Gear.
This is Metal Gear Acid, released by Konami in 2005. This was a launch PSP game. I know this because I bought it at launch with the PSP, and it's one of many non-canonical Metal Gear games on the platform. Shinta Nijiri, the director of Never Dead, made both of these games, and he was essentially given the keys to the Metal Gear kingdom to encapsulate the entirety of the Metal Gear library and other associated Konami games in the context of a tactical card-based strategy game. Now, card games aren't my typical fare, but since the PSP launch library didn't have too many options, and this was the closest thing I had to a Metal Gear game at the time, I kept an open mind. And to this very date, this is one of my top 3 PSP games. Metal Gear Acid 1 is a non-canonical story about Snake, who's trying to stop a terrorist from killing all these important people on a plane. explain. The story isn't the main draw to the game, it's the cards that you draw. As I said, this is a grid-based tactical RPG, where you build a deck comprised of various characters from Metal Gear lore that imbue Snake with the ability to move across the field in his stealth infiltration mission to either make it to the other side of the map or take out all the guards or do some sort of special objective. Like Metal Gear, you can choose the violent way or the pacifist way to approach most levels. The first Acid game allows you to get cards from Metal Gear Solid 2, Metal Gear Solid Snake Eater, and then miscellaneous Konami games, of which include stuff like the Legacy Metal Gear games, or even Snatcher makes a cameo in here. The best part is just getting new cards and seeing what they do. You can really get into the nitty-gritty of setting up your deck based around your favorite characters or weapons from Metal Gear. When you use some of these cards, it'll play a little cutscene from that particular game, and then do something cool like summon Gray Fox to invisibly cut up an enemy with a katana. I absolutely love these little promotional commercials they made for these new card decks when you unlock them. They're silly, but they also get you pumped for the new deck.
It is the MGS 1 pack. Stun grenades to knock enemies unconscious, and a cardboard box to fool their eyes. Check out the card shop during intermission.
The first one's a decent game, but some of the levels drag on way too long. I'm talking about 30 minutes to an hour in some cases. They corrected most of the mistakes of the first one in Metal Gear Acid 2. Metal Gear Acid 2 was released in 2006, and it's everything the first game is, only enhanced in every conceivable way. The game is far more stylized, choosing for more of a comic book, high contrast color scheme. And this was an intentional art choice to support the game's most gimmicky and infamous accessory, the Solid Eye. The Solid Eye is a very rudimentary form of 3D that was included with every copy of Metal Gear Acid 2. You take this shitty piece of cardboard and try and throw a divider in it, and then you're supposed to slide your PSP under it and look through these little goggles. There are two duplicated screens, and they're presented in a 4:3 aspect ratio, and they converge to pop out certain UI elements while you're playing the game. Side note, it's not compatible with the PSP Go. I was very impressed many years ago when I first tried this out. This even predates the 3D trend in the early 2010s, like way before the 3DS. Konami was ahead of the curve here. The Solid Eye allows you to play the entire game in 3D, where you can unlock these raunchy little movies of all these JAV models and watch it in 3D in the privacy of your bedroom at age 18. The Solid Eye is an interesting curiosity to say the least, but in practical terms, I could not see myself playing for long stretches of time because I was afraid of just getting that visor all greasy, and it really doesn't drastically change the experience besides making a few UI elements pop out. These things go for a lot in the collector's market, and I'll never understand why. Metal Gear Acid 2 introduces more decks, more cards. You can transfer some of your cards over from Metal Gear Acid 1 into 2. And I think there's somewhere over 600 unique cards to find all across Metal Gear and Konami history, and they even have some stuff from Metal Gear Solid 4 because that was on the horizon when this game came out. Word of caution, if you ever choose to emulate Metal Gear Acid 2, do note that when you use certain cards and it tries to play that video clip, it's known to completely crash the PSP emulator. That happened several times when I tried to capture for this video, and I dug through and no one seems to have a solution for this. So once again, if you want the most authentic Metal Gear Acid experience, play it on the original hardware. I would say the audience for this game is limited specifically to Metal Gear fans. You really have to know a little bit of Metal Gear lore to truly appreciate some of the cameos and references here and there. And it has that idiosyncratic Metal Gear logic to some of the events that unfold. I'll always have a soft spot for the series, and I'd like to talk about it more one day. Koro Hiro Ryu ga Gotoku, aka Like a Dragon Black Panther, aka Yakuza Black Panther. Did you know the Yakuza series had not one but two representations on the PSP? It's hard to imagine now, but Sega didn't seem to have enough faith in the franchise in the West in the early 2010s. It took a substantial amount of fan outcry to even get them to localize most of the mainline series over here, so unfortunately most of the Yakuza spin-offs were left in Japan until recently. Team K4L put in the work to release an English translation patch that's still undergoing development. Black Panther follows the story of Tatsuya, a 17-year-old delinquent with a serious violent streak to him. The writers made no attempts to give him a heart of gold under his rough exterior. He's a born street fighter that lacks discipline and shows absolutely no mercy. Just check out how brutal some of his heat moves are. The fighting here is not as free-flowing or refined as later titles. Battles are treated more like random encounters, which zone the action to a 1v1 perspective with higher quality graphics. The fighting engine was developed by the Aki Corporation, who based the combat around their work on the Def Jam series. It's a clunky middle ground between Def Jam Fight for NY and Yakuza, an odd blend to say the least. I'm not a fan of some of the control choices here, specifically when it comes to picking up objects and switching between multiple enemies. I still believe they did the best that they could to adapt a full-on Yakuza game working within the limitations of the PSP. In a similar fashion to the PSP Metal Gear games, Black Panther presents its cutscenes as animated comic panels that still manage to convey the series' signature brutal fights and long-winded dialogue-heavy drama scenes. Tatsuya's urge to fight everyone lands him in trouble with the mob after he's accused of beating one of the top enforcers to death. To pay for his debt and save his life, he's thrown into an underground fighting arena where he squares off against leagues of professional fighters and becoming a legend in the ring in his own right. At the time of this video, all the story missions and cutscenes are fully translated, but there's still a lot more work to be done to translate all the side missions, flavor text, and many other things. This project is a massive undertaking passion project, and I suggest you give Team K4L a follow to track the development of the translation. Sadly, this is your only option because Ryoga Gotoku Studios have formally announced that they have no plans to localize Black Panther or re-release either of the two games, so fan translations will be the only way to experience these games if you don't read Japanese. I've only played a little bit through the story, and I can't wait to play through the rest of Tatsuya's games when the patches are finished. I was so disappointed when Sega chose to pass over localizing this game, and I thank the fans for picking up their slack. If you like Yakuza, it's a no-brainer. Check it out. What Did I Do to Deserve This, My Lord? Developed by Acquire and released in North America in 2010. This series has confusingly undergone 3 name changes, and now it's more commonly referred to as the No Heroes Allowed series. I refer to them as the Badman games because he's the star of the show here. By the way, if you buy the physical copy of 2, the first game can be unlocked with a cheat code. I'm just gonna wrap all 3 PSP games into this one segment, okay? In the the simplest terms, the Badman games are all about creating ecosystems of monsters to populate an underground dungeon where the foul-mouthed Badman lives. The goal here is to protect Badman from getting captured by heroes. You play as a magical pickaxe known as the God of Destruction. At the start of each level, you're given a couple of minutes to dig out a dungeon to hide Badman from the heroes. When you smash blocks of certain colors, it will immediately spawn a monster. The idea is to amass an army of monsters to thwart the heroes before they can go through the dungeon and drag Badman away. Now, this seems like a simple enough premise, but there's an incredible amount of variance when it comes to monster breeding and maintaining the ecosystem. There's multiple different monsters you can cultivate from breaking blocks, and the ecosystem of the dungeon is based around monster populations. There's a whole food chain at play, and I highly recommend running the tutorial levels before jumping into the main game. It's not entirely self-explanatory through the gameplay. Heroes will wander into the depths of the dungeon to get Badman, so you're gonna want to make sure you dig out dead ends and loops to delay their progress. Each hero has weaknesses and strengths against the various monsters, so you need to adapt your monster colony accordingly. You only have a limited amount of dig power, which is also the currency used to upgrade your monsters in between rounds. Heroes will set traps, cast spells, and wipe out swarms of monsters as they make their descent. Fortunately, you can continue to dig and breed monsters while they're making their descent. Even if they manage to capture Badman, they still have to drag him out of the dungeon, so there's still a chance for victory here. The game is delightfully retro with its all pixel art presentation. Badman's cursing and pop culture references will bring a smirk to your face, and once you've gotten a few dead heroes under your belt, you won't want to stop. Badman was as close as the PSP ever got to an original mascot for the system, and his games deserve so much better. If you're into fast-paced strategy and love when games break the fourth wall, you're gonna find a lot to love with the Badman series. I have an entire retrospective on all the games on my channel. I would grade this Badman out of 10. This is Patchwork Heroes, also put out by Acquire in 2010. This was a recent discovery for me. A commenter had suggested, hey, if you like the Badman games, you're gonna love this one. So I did a little research and come to find out Patchwork Heroes only got a digital-only release in North America, but it got a physical copy in Europe and Japan, so it just flew under my radar. Anyways, thank you to whoever suggested this, because this game rules. The best way I could describe Patchwork Heroes is that it reminds me of that game Kicks. You're given a square space and you have to try and draw a line to two sides of it and claim that space until you've claimed the majority of that open space. If you've ever played the game Bully, there's this mini game in the art class that's an homage to Kicks. So if you like either of these two things, you're really gonna like Patchwork Heroes. Like Badman before it, I would recommend running the tutorial segments because they are so much more involved than just drawing two lines. You play as this little guy who's part of a rebellious army, and he has to take out these giant warships, and he does that by cutting off little sections of it at a time. So you can just draw a line straight up and it'll remove that section of the ship, and then you just keep going on with that until the ship can no longer fly and it crash lands, and boom, satisfying victory. You can set bombs in a Bomberman-like fashion to take out giant lines at a time, and there are also enemies to dodge, and along the way you'll have to rescue some of your prisoners who will then join your entourage, and there's a whole little thing about collecting all the different town citizens. The better you do, or if you pick up a power-up, it builds up your character's mojo, which doubles their speed and allows them to cut through the ship faster. The game will sink its hooks into you rather quickly. You're gonna know if you like this game or not fairly fairly early on. I don't know what it is, but the older I've gotten, the more affinity I have towards odd puzzle games like this. If you want to import the PAL copy of this game, it's region free, so you can have it on your shelf if you want to. Hikiko says, check it out. Retro City Rampage DX had the distinction of being the last official PSP game released in July of 2016 by V-Blank Entertainment. Now, it's not a PSP exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. It's available to play on nearly all major platforms. But for posterity's sake, I still felt it was worth mentioning. Retro City Rampage DX is my personal favorite Grand Theft Auto type game on the PSP, and yes, I do enjoy it more than the official GTA games released on the system. In the game, you are the player, a generic thug carrying out a bank heist for a criminal syndicate run by the Jester. And if you're starting to get Dark Knight vibes, that's intentional. Retro City Rampage is chock full of pop culture and video game references, often bordering on copyright infringement in some cases. Now, I fully acknowledge that most of my enjoyment of RCR derives from a sick game of playing Spot the Reference, but that's not always a bad thing. In the story, the player is running from the police and ends up hijacking Bill and Ted's time-traveling telephone booth and flings himself into the future. With the help of not Doc Brown, the player must find various time machine pieces to return back to the 80s. From this point forward, the city of Theftopolis is open to explore, and there are so many secrets here to discover. You can jack any vehicle you see, jump into a rampage mission mowing down all in sight, or hit up your local barber to get your ears lowered. The amount of fine-tuning V-Blank allowed for the player to have over the game extends beyond just custom outfits to stuff like changing the color palette to match your preferred retro platform of choice. Now, as for the gameplay, I was extremely impressed by the implementation of multi-targeting aiming and a full-on cover system for the shooting mechanics. V-Blank managed to do an incredible job adapting a 3D open world style of game into the confined limitations of a two-dimensional space. It's something you'll come to understand after you've gotten into your first shootout. There's a large variety of retro-inspired weaponry and accessories to experiment with, ranging from Link's sword and shield to Sonic the Hedgehog's shoes. No reference was left unturned. No matter where you play Retro City Rampage, you're bound to have a good time if you're into retro-styled games. Most of all, I just love the time-displaced feeling of Retro City Rampage. Yes, that's totally intentional here since we're dealing with a time travel 8-bit inspired game, but it does feel like a lost NES title dug out of some old storage area and ROM dumped later on. It just scratches all my nostalgic itches in all the right places, and I felt it was a great final note for the PSP to go out on. I know it's been done to death, but this kind of pixel art throwback revival of a bygone era was quite novel at the time it released in 2012, and I still think it holds its own against all the million other clones that have since released. Absolutely check this out. Well, this is the part in the video where we say goodbye. I've been Hikiko. Thanks so much for watching my very first portable system focus video. I hope you've enjoyed it. There's over 2,000 PSP games, so unfortunately I couldn't cover everything. But I'm not opposed to doing more in the future, so if you have a favorite PSP game that I didn't cover, leave it down below, and that helps me. You do the research for me and help drive engagement on my channel. Win-win. And I also have a playlist right here of all the other system videos I've done, and if you want to support the channel, it's right there. It's an option. Okay, I appreciate it. Okay, I've got some business to take care of. When you dual wield PSPs, you're getting double the work done in half the time. Anyway, I'll talk to you all next time. Bye bye.